We'll have a look at 5 teams across these 5 points. And the first team I want to have a look at is the Western Bulldogs. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at 8-point games coming into the last 5 weeks of the season, 6 weeks of the season. And they've been able to win 8-point games against Carlton, Geelong and Sydney in the last 3 weeks. Their form is tracking the right way, and the coach is rightfully pleased with his charges and looking forward to their prospects for the rest of 2024. I think that last point, a different version of himself, is spot on. The Dogs have found some grit, they've found some spine, they've found some efficiencies that we spoke about. 2 areas of their game that we doubted early in the year was their intercept game and their ability to put front half pressure on. So, West, McNeil, Vandermeer, Garcia, they're players that have come in and are now playing. They're not household names, but they're playing important roles in terms of pressure on. And then when you have a look at what they've been able to rejig in their back six, Bailey Dale we know is a gun. Karmas has come in, Jones and Lobb as those keys. Their intercept game's in great shape. So they've added those 2 elements to what we knew was a really strong and deep midfield. Ed Richards is having a profound impact there. They're not relying on a Marcus Bontempelli the way they used to. And then they've obviously got their tall players, Ugle-Hagan, Norton and Darcy, who are in front of the ball for contests. They've been impressive. The Dogs fans would be pleasantly surprised with what has happened and transpired given the position that they were in early in the season.
How far can it take them? Look, it's going to be difficult to finish top 4, and only they know how hard it is to win it from outside the top 4. I don't suspect that will happen again. How far can it take them? Is it?
Well, I don't know how difficult it will be. Like, if they win 4 games, I think they're top 4. So they've got Melbourne next week, which is a big game, and the D's have dropped off. So that's one. I mean, and having beaten the team that were 2 games clear at the top of the ladder by with the best part of 7 goals, they can take on all comers. They look fit, they look healthy. What do we say about going back to where there was questions around top 4 lists, where there was questions about Bevo? Does that show that it's just a cycle that teams go on and that we in the media get ahead of ourselves a little?
Maybe a little bit, but I think the criticism around the inability to get the side settled early and the missed opportunity that they've had to not only finish top 4 but top 2. Now they may finish top 4. I still think that's going to be difficult for them. It's a missed opportunity once again. Their list, as I said before the ball was bounced, with Brisbane is the most stacked list in the game. So I think it is absolutely fair for us to be critical of the waste that was the first 10 weeks of the season and the missed opportunity for it. Now, okay, you get your side settled and you get your players into good form because the side is settled, and what you can do is what we've seen. They still have the odd performance like the Port Adelaide game where you just go, okay, this side is not there. But is there any team that you can see in this competition that in the first 5 minutes you can tell whether they're on like this? So some teams are able to turn it around, like they start slowly, like Sydney have done, and they get themselves into the game. For the Western Bulldogs, when they turn up with the attitude like they have against Carlton in the first 5 minutes, Geelong in the first 5 minutes, and yesterday, you go, this team, they are on. So there is something that is working well for them in terms of being switched on from the start. But they're absolutely stacked. Ugle-Hagan has put together an epic month of football and now appears to be the most dangerous key forward in the game. And, I mean, they've just got talent everywhere. So I'm not surprised this has happened. You'd just be a little bit disappointed if they don't manage to finish top 4. What a waste the first portion of the season was.
Well, we know that the seasons are marathons, and given that you called for Bevo's head earlier, do you think that that was harsh not harsh at the time, but do you think that you can walk back from that, given that the performance that clearly he has put in to get his team to where they are right now?
Well, they're 8th, aren't they? They're 8th with a list that is
they're one of the form teams in the comp.
The second most talented list in the game, if not the most talented. So the criticism around that was the wasted opportunities they've had in the last.
Would they be in this position if they
years.
sacked Bevo? If they sacked Bevo in round
Well,
six?
it was the end of the year. The discussion was they were never going to sack him mid-year when he's got a year after this or 2 years after this. So it was never around that. It was, could another coach get a better performance out of this list that they've got? Now, the club has always said they're top four. Bevo was trying to walk away from those comments earlier on in the year and say, no, we're rejigging and redeveloping and resetting, or whatever the words he was using. Well, the club was right, and he didn't quite have the right lens on how good this list can be. Now, it's all come together for them late, but we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see whether they get themselves in a position to win a premiership, which this list is absolutely capable of doing. And if he does win it, Bucks, then I'll put my hand up and go, you know what? I was harsh on Beveridge, but I still think there's a bit to play out in that one. What's point number two?
No doubt there is. They've the only team in 30 years to beat, to win 3 games in a row against top 3 teams. So that's been a fair effort for them. The number 2 is the Brisbane Lions, and they are the form team of the competition. 9 of their last 10 games they've been able to win. No key backs at all. No Payne, no Andrews, no Joyce, and they just find a way around it. And I thought that Chris Fagan, would have been happy with that, and that's exactly what he spoke about after the game. I put the Lions in the Sydney basket a little bit about they are like Chris Fagan's philosophy is very similar to John Longmire's. They will play their best available team as often as they possibly can. They're not a team. They're not a coach or a coaching group that will rotate a depth of lists through those positions to have sort of choice when you get a bit further down the season or you have a few injuries. I think the Lions have been forced into this position more than other times. They had injuries early in the season. They've had to expose their depth. They've had young players that have come in. I think Chris Fagan's become even more adventurous, even more aggressive in the way that he wants to play in some of his selection decisions, and it reflects the fact that they had to chase the season. They weren't just going to get to where they are by making safe decisions. And he spoke about that in a close win against Adelaide, when Adelaide came back in that last quarter. And he said, well, we're not going to get to where we want to get to by being safe. Like Hipwood at centre half back is something we would never have imagined. And he paddled at times, and Ben King helped him by not kicking straight. But in the end, Hipwood gets a 50-metre, kicks a goal. He plays a role. Lester and Starcevic are undersized keys in that mix. But the rest of their game is in such great nick that they were able to handle, missing some key attributes of and key personnel in their game. And I thought, that was, if you're a Lions fan now, you're thinking,
they're the best
how far
team in
can we go? Well, they're nearly the most reliable
8 in
team
a row
right now, are they not? Oh, they're in great form, with Sydney faltering a little bit. Freo, as good as they're going, you still wonder, okay, against the top 4 sides on the G, how are they going to go? Brisbane have been there, done that, and they've been up for 5. This is the 6th season in a row that they've been up and about in top 4. They've won more games than any other team in the competition in that time, and they're looking absolutely cherry ripe. Cam Rayner's game, that's the 3rd time he's had 25 in his career. Once earlier this year in round 6 against Melbourne, and once in 2022, but a couple of goals, 25 touches. He's in career best form as well.
Last month, like Hugo Hagen, his last month has been just outstanding, and one of the most watchable players in football. All right, tell us about the Hawks.
Third's the Hawks, and I thought their performance yesterday was, so full of merit, and they've continued on their merry way. So they're the next best informed team, 8 wins out of their last 10, and as you said about the Bulldogs, there's 9 teams now that look to be competing for 8 spots, and there's still a month of footy, plenty of 8-point games, but the Hawks were huge, and Sam Mitchell was most impressed with the evenness of his team's performance. They had a dozen players between 15 touches and 22 touches, and it wasn't as you talk about not relying on a Bontempelli or not relying on a Nick Dacos. Well, you have a look at Hawthorn, they look like robots. They look like replicas and clones of themselves, and that's exactly what it is. And they pop up in groups of 4 or 5 or 6 around a contest, and then they run in waves. Their ability to put handball chains together in the wet last week against Collingwood, and then in a twilight game against Adelaide was it's competition best. You have a look at, when you get a chance, go and have a look at the Jarman Impey goal, and the power of the running. So the power of the running and the efficiency of the handball. Every one of those handballs was on task, maintained momentum, and I think that's like the basic skills that we're seeing Hawthorn execute is one of the reasons why they're able to sieve sides offensively, and they're getting the job done defensively as well. That they can tackle well, they break tackles, their ground ball is excellent. They hit targets with either by hand or foot. I think they were going at 90% by foot early in the game, late in the first quarter. So they're a handful. It doesn't matter who they play, where or when. They're going to be very hard to beat.
So it probably helps. I mean, they kick, as far as I can see it, from their back half, 7 goals from their back half. You mentioned the Impey goal. When Matthew Nicks picks 4 Giants in the forward line and the lack of pressure that was allowed there. I mean, the error in doing that against this Hawthorn side, who is has a small forward line themselves, as you've just described, and the damage that they're doing. And Nicks goes with Fogarty, Thilthorpe, Walker, and Himmelberg. Bizarre, wasn't it? Not even in hindsight. Like when the teams were named, you're okay, well, Himmelberg's playing back, he has to. But yeah, really strange.
Well, but on the flip side, that's one part of it. On the flip side, you've got Ugle-Hagan, Norton, Darcy, and English. So so in the end, I suppose you didn't add O'Brien. You didn't add O'Brien to that. But yeah, sometimes it's about availability. Sometimes you might not have the medium sort of forwards in form, or you might not even have them on your list. You've got to develop them. I think that Cook and Dowling are 2 players that are sort of those in-between players. Cook's been a third tall forward at times, but there's no doubt that the balance against a running, consistent sort of competitive side like Hawthorn that just have so many sort of 6-footers, 6-1ers that just do a lot of damage. They play undersized, and I do like the way that Hawthorn's set up. I think the evidence is that the Sicily player, the Weddle, and we've seen it with plenty of other sides as well, that can handle playing with an undersized defence or even an undersized offence in what you would look at. But their ground cover and their ability to compete consistently is what gets them over the line. This
is the buck stops for Supergroups, first picked every week for Kubota Excavators, supergroups.com.au. Essendon on the agenda next.
Essendon supporters are lighting up the text machine and they're calling in and
happy?
No, they're not happy at all. Where is the edge, I suppose, is the question.
Where has edge.
That Essendon edge gone? They weren't happy to have it spoken about too much early in the season, the internal environment, the players and the coaches, Brad Scott in particular. But it was on display. It was on display. There was an edge, and there's no doubt that the work that they'd done off-season, the players had gone away, and it looked like they had been able to turn over a new leaf and have a fresh start from what has been a challenging couple of decades, if we want to zoom out enough. But the next month for this football club is so crucial for Brad Scott as a coach, for the leadership in the playing group. They need to show some mettle. They need to show some edge. They need to show some fight. I'm not even concerned about whether they make finals or win a final anymore. It really is about a minimum expectation and standard, and the edge that they spoke about, that they propagated in some shape or form, needs to be evident in this last month, no matter what the ladder position says at the end of it.
Does he need to pick competitors? Because there was so many non-competitors there on Saturday afternoon. I hadn't seen a performance with a lack of pressure like that from the Bombers. I mean, the Port Adelaide game in gather round, there was a little bit of that in the second half, but largely they had been pretty consistent with that aspect of their game. But there was no effort. Like, I'm looking at Laverde as probably one of the worst games I've seen as a defender this year. I'm looking at Peter Wright, who consistently refuses to compete. The selection of Darcy Parish was just bizarre, really. It looks like he needs a month in the VFL, let alone playing straight back in and rushing him back in. What do you do with Dylan Shield? How do you get the message to Stringer to compete? Is Gresham a player that you think is going to take you forward in the next 2 to 3 years? Are you skinny wingmen providing enough contest with Cox and Jones? Is there a thought, Bucks, as a coach, and you've been in this position, that you can just pick your most competitive outfit and the ones that you know will give it their all? Whether that's a Hobbs, I'm not sure going through the availability of the group, but I don't know. Is that a starting point or not?
Something needs to change. There's no doubt that something needs to change. Their last two performances, and as we were saying, we're talking about 8-point games, and Essendon have lost their last two games to teams that weren't in that 13, that weren't in the mix for finals. They lost to Adelaide, and then they've lost to St Kilda. These are two teams that their seasons were over, and the only joy they were going to get out of these games was putting a hole in the prospects of one of those 13 teams. Essendon have lost both of those games in recent weeks. Their recent form has been extremely poor, and Brad Scott was exasperated in his presser, and rightly so. But the effort and attitude of a playing group is a product of their environment. It's a product of what the expectations are, and I would suspect that the thing that we'll see different will be what Brad Scott does. If it's in terms of selection, if it's in terms of making a statement, it might be in terms of his edge internally, but he can't do it all. But this is the coaching challenge: is how do you deal with the mentality and the psychology of this group of players? Because you can't just change. You can't take 20 out and put 20 in. That's not going to happen. But the psychology of this group of players needs to be adjusted to the point where they come out and have a real crack in over this next month. And that's what they will be judged on. This 16 quarters, what do they present? What do they put forward? You need to you have a minimum expectation on what you get from this month. And finally, I want to have a chat quickly around the Carlton Port Adelaide contest and what you may have seen in that. I was struck by watching that game. I thought, I don't think either of these sides are going to do a lot of damage in September, and they were second and third on the ladder at that particular time.
What was it about that you thought?
I think defensively they both look like they're vulnerable. I think they lose too many contests that they should win, and they're a little bit inconsistent on the other side of the ball as forwards. But both Michael Voss and Ken Hinkley, and probably when you're the losing coach, you're going to be a little bit flat on it, and when you're the winning coach, you're going to be a little bit more upbeat. But they both had their say after the game. Port Adelaide, I think they're shuffling the deck chairs and finding the best that they can. But geez, you can expose them in their back six,
and that's been the case all year. They're too easy to score off turnover. The out the back goals has been there. But it was an impressive defensive display in the second half to keep them to one goal, 91
Correct.
tackles around the ball. I thought Willem Drew was really good on Cripps after Cripps got them earlier on in the year, so that was a good coaching move. But look, I've always thought Porter somewhere from 6 to 10. I got a bit more faith in Carlton for them to be able to right the ship and turn it around. I just think they're well led. They've been through challenges before, and they've been pretty resilient and steadfast in what needs to change. So I would think that there's still a chance to play off in a prelim final. So, but clearly the questions will be there, and who is going to step up in the Carlton midfield when Cripps and Walsh aren't at their absolute best? I'm just not sure who that player is for them. What are we to make of the Swans, Bucks?
Yeah, well, they've hit a couple of speed humps, haven't they? There's no doubt that they're gettable now. We've been speaking about it all year. The competition have a chance to have a look at how you play and then unpack that. That is one of the issues about showing your very best for a significant period of time at the beginning of the year. They're going through a few injury concerns, so they've lost a little bit of the momentum and the shared experience that they've had with that, pretty much rolling over the same 23 sort of week after week after week. Not getting quite as much bite from their midfield or their halfbacks. Warner was really quiet on the weekend.
He had 11. What?
Yeah, so you're not going to see that often. Now, he's not a 30 possession getting player every week, but he's a high impact player. He had zero impact on the game. The Dogs were pretty much put them in a sleeper hold and put them to sleep. And that was the most impressive thing about their performance. The Sydney just didn't have time or space to go anywhere, and they've been able to do as they will or as they wish, sort of, in the first 2/3 of the year. So they're going to have to go back to contest and work rate, which is what they've got a healthy reservoir of that in their back pockets.
Now, Tom Stewart starts in the centre bounce and then just plays the role that he's always played. Now, we've seen how vulnerable he is to some extra attention. And we saw it for a good 6-week period there and it coincided with Geelong and their struggles and the frustration of one of their leaders. And it was evident for Tom. He just couldn't get his game going. So Chris Scott says, well, we'll start him in the centre bounce, but then largely he's just going to play the normal role. He had 22 of his 32 in the back half. How could North Melbourne not be aware of that? Like, is that bamboozling that you can't get a defensive forward to start out of the centre bounce and then just go and play next to him and make him accountable after the centre bounce has played out? How are we missing this?
No, we're not missing it, but it's...
Well, they missed it. Alistair Clarkson missed it.
Well, yes and no. I think that...
It would have been 5 goals up in the first quarter if it wasn't for Tom Stewart.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you consider how you're going, whether you want to equalise with numbers in front of the ball for you, and North Melbourne have actually prioritised their run from the back, and they'll take their extra number and run it through. So, and that looked excellent.
Looked good
at times until it got to that last kick. Now what they've been able to do is put an extra couple of handballs together and then finish, and then go over the top of that extra player in previous weeks. In their best football since the bye, they've looked really damaging from stoppage, and they've looked really damaging running from half back. So they got 2/3 of what they wanted, but they couldn't finish off that last part. Now, that's due in part to, maybe you say it's strategy. You can say it's the Geelongs want to always have that extra number behind it. And you've got to give Tom Stewart credit. He's the best in the competition at doing it. Yes, he has been scuttled for a 6 or 7 week period.
You know why he's the best? He's only the best when someone doesn't play on him. He's not the best. He's not Bucks. He's not the best when someone actually puts the attention into him and does a Chin Cotter or
Kane,
a Jed McEntee. He's not.
What I would say, Kane, is that he's been doing it for a lot longer than just this year.
Been doing it. He's been doing it largely with no one assigned to him. Like, how many times?
No, I don't agree.
Prior to this year, have teams gone after him? I've hardly seen. I don't agree with that. I've seen Port Adelaide do it with McEntee multiple times. I haven't seen many others do it. He's got a vulnerability when he has an opposition player dedicated to limiting him. That doesn't happen often.
Yeah, the recency bias would remind us about when he was targeted and the run width or the tag was effective, and he was out of form and clearly affected by that focus and pressure. He hasn't gone through his entire career without it. That would just be negligent to actually consider that it hasn't been coached
not with
against.
this targeted approach.
No, not with as an effective targeted approach, which is what we've seen. But that doesn't mean that he hadn't contributed to that as well. I think for the first time in his career, Tom Stewart
do you think they did that on the weekend? Do you think they put any attention into him on the weekend? And do you think he plays better when there's no attention versus attention? Every
ball-getting player plays better without attention, but it's actually obviously what you're going to give to get. But the coaching move of Chris Scott, putting him into the middle and then slowly dropping him back into the role that he's played. So every week, Tom Stewart has basically returned more and more to the role that we've been expecting him to be. The first couple of weeks, it was a defensive mid that was 10 or 15 metres off. Then he was 20 or 25, and now he's getting deeper and deeper. But just because something works for a short period of time doesn't mean it hasn't been tried before, and it won't be tried again, potentially with or without success. But Tom Stewart had his way on the weekend, no doubt. Would you say that Nick Watson is your man? Is he one of your men?
Yeah, I got a few, but he's absolutely my man.
So I think you and King had a conversation about how many goals he was going to kick this year. I think 30 was the over-under. He's not going to get there, but he's coming with a rush. What would he be able to do next year with a full season, with more supply? What do you reckon he's capable of kicking next year?
That's a good Good question without notice. He's kicked 12 goals, 20 this year from 12 games. So he's going at a goal. I thought he was good for 2 goals a game. And then I thought, maybe that's a bit high expectations in his first year. Next year, I think that's a possibility. So 40?
So 40 next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's, he puts himself in dangerous spots, and he's as we've seen in the last 5 or 6 weeks, his work rate's through the roof.
No.
Yeah, he's up there.
He's going to be selling a few Guernseys, and he's not alone at Hawthorn. Simon Goodwin has been really defiant on Clayton Oliver and his future, and him being a Melbourne player and all those. Really strong after the talk around the future of Clayton Oliver. Should they be surprised about this, Melbourne? Like, should they be surprised that there's talk about Clayton Oliver's future when they're the ones that initiated all of this talk last off-season? As now it's all of a sudden, Clayton Oliver's our guy, he's a Melbourne guy. When they're the ones that actually release the strongly worded statement about the future of Clayton Oliver, about the expectations of what they expect from him, about the way that he treats the staff and all that. And you can go back and read it from Gary Pert and the like. And they're clearly floated his name, whether it was real or not, to send a message. And now all of a sudden Simon Goodwin speaks after the game as if this has just been created out of thin air.
No, they shouldn't be surprised, but I think that what they were measuring, and they put it on the agenda. They were basically calling Clayton Oliver's bluff, and but that was around his off-field standards, from what I understand, and how he was going to meet the football club and the player lists going forward. So that's a totally different ask and a totally different question to what was proposed in the last couple of weeks. And I think the last couple of weeks was about his contract status, the money that is being committed to him over a long period of time, and his recent form.
Yeah,
so I can understand Simon Goodwin defending that in terms of the on-field stuff. Melbourne went hard with the off-field, and I feel like they've faced him, that they had those conversations and they've got through it. And then I think the recent conversation has been largely around his value for money going forward, and I can understand them being strong on that, coming back against that.
Yeah. So my version is when you put that out there, and your everything you've said is right, but then when his form drops away as significantly as what it has, clearly there's Adelaide that he's interested. Then there's journalists and news reports sweeping around that there are people out there that think. Clubs out there that think Clayton Oliver is gettable. I mean, just bizarre that then they would go and be so strong on his future when they initiated it. Anyway.
Well, one thing I would say about that is, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, I think when you evolve as a person and as a player, there are going to be changes in what you see. I think we know he hasn't had a great preseason. We know there was lots of question marks. I think he's evolving from what he was to what he's going to be. He's a high-level talent. I think when we get beyond this year and he goes on with the rest of his career, I think he will get back to the player that we've known him as. When you change your preparation and you lose a little bit of your edge, like he's gone about it a certain way, and he's clearly making those shifts for his own benefit and for Melbourne's. I think eventually he gets back. So I didn't mind the fact that the club came out to support him as strongly as they did.
All right.